Resellers are ruining thrift stores. They take all the good stuff. They buy something for $10 and then have the audacity to sell it for $50. On my last video, I got a comment from someone essentially accusing me of stealing plus-size clothing from people who actually need it. And I want to talk about it. I've actually been seeing this conversation circulating around social media lately. And if you've spent any amount of time in the resale world, you've probably heard some version of this argument against reselling too. The argument is that resellers are taking clothes away from people who actually need them in order to make a profit. And well, obviously I have a stake in this because I've been reselling clothes online for years now. I actually do think there is a legitimate ethical question underneath all of this. And if I'm being honest, it's one that has even bothered me from time to time. If I buy a dress for $10 and I resell it for $80, what have I actually done to earn that $60? Am I just taking advantage of people? And maybe more importantly, did someone else lose something because I bought it? I think the answer to these questions explains why we've been having the wrong conversation about resellers. In today's video, I'm going to answer the question, is reselling ethical? And I've looked at this from all different angles. I've read comments on people's TikToks talking about this. I know what both sides of the argument are, and I'm going to respond. So let's start with the part that I think bothers people the most, the markup. Let's say I walk into a thrift store and I find an Anthropologie dress for $10. I buy it, I go home, I photograph it, I list it for $75, and eventually someone comes along and they pay me $60 for it. Immediately there's this reaction of, but you only paid $10 for that, which is true. But here's what I find interesting. Almost no one applies that logic to literally any other business model. Almost everything that you purchase was acquired or produced for less than what you end up paying for it. That's how retail works. But reselling does work a little differently than traditional retail. And one of the biggest differences is risk. When I buy that $10 Anthropologie dress, there's no guarantee that someone will eventually give me $60 for it. I'm making a bet. I'm betting that I know the resale market well enough to know that someone will eventually want this dress. And sometimes I'm right. And sometimes I'm very wrong. If you've ever looked at a reseller's death pile, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. I've purchased plenty of things where I thought, this is gonna sell immediately. This is gonna sell for $60. And then 6 months later, it's still sitting in a bin in my apartment and humbling me every single time I walk by it. My point is, for every incredible flip that you see where someone turns something that they bought for $8 into something that sells for $150, there are countless other items that don't sell for as much as they thought, or that still haven't sold yet and it's been a year. And while I'm holding on to that inventory, my money is tied up in it. And there's also the labor involved. I have to find the item, photograph it, figure out what the style name is, research the piece, write the listing, put it up on Poshmark or Depop or eBay, potentially all free, store it, send offers, answer questions, eventually package it, and ship it to the buyer. Every single item is its own individual tiny business transaction. So when someone pays me $60 for an item that I bought for $10, they're not paying me $60 because I successfully prevented them from getting it for $10. They are paying for the convenience of me having found the item for them. But there's an obvious counter argument to everything I just said. Somebody else might have just purchased it from the thrift store in the first place. And this is probably the argument that I hear the most often. That Reformation dress was never going to go to the landfill. Someone else would have bought it from the thrift store. And I agree, at least sometimes. And this is where I think resellers actually weaken their own argument. You'll hear people say, I'm saving clothes from the landfill. And then they're holding like a pristine Ralph Lauren vintage sweater that was just put on the rack at Goodwill 5 minutes ago. Would that particular sweater have ended up in the landfill if this reseller had not heroically intervened? Probably not. Someone else might very well have bought it. So as a reseller, I don't think we need to pretend that every single item that we purchase was moments away from being thrown into a dumpster. But this argument is just looking at that one sweater. Let's zoom out, because when you look at the sheer amount of clothing that we're dealing with, it's actually overwhelming. According to the National Institute of Standards and Technology, researchers estimate that 85% of clothing and other textiles in the United States end up in landfills or are incinerated. 85%. Let that number sink in. And by the way, this isn't clothing that nobody bothered donating. NIST has also previously reported that only 20% of textiles and clothing that are donated to charities and thrift stores are actually able to be resold domestically. What happens to the rest of it? It enters this enormous secondary system. Some of it ends up getting exported abroad. Some of it might get turned into like industrial wiping cloths or insulation. Some of it may get recycled and turned into new clothing. And some of it, a lot of it, most of it ends up as waste. So the answer is no, I cannot tell you that that specific dress that I bought from Goodwill would have definitively ended up in a landfill had I not intervened. But what I can tell you is that we have absolutely no shortage of used clothing in the United States. What we do have is a distribution problem. We have mountains of existing clothing while simultaneously producing and purchasing mountains of new clothing. And that to me is the much more important sustainability question. How can we get more people to buy the clothing that already exists, particularly over the clothing that is being produced brand new? Because having millions of garments that already exist doesn't matter if nobody can find them. Think about how we're conditioned to shop now. If I decide that I want a blue linen midi dress for a wedding that I'm attending next month, all I have to do is open my phone, type in blue linen midi dress, size 8, and hundreds of listings are going to pop up. Within seconds, I'm comparing prices, I'm reading reviews, and I purchase one, and 3 days later, it's sitting on my doorstep. Now, compare that experience to the experience of thrift shopping. I want that blue linen midi dress. I walk into a Goodwill on a random Tuesday. Maybe I find a blue dress. Maybe it's linen. Maybe it's my size. Maybe I like it. Or maybe none of those things happen and I end up going to 4 different Goodwills and it takes my whole weekend and I end up with nothing. And listen, I personally love that experience. I love the treasure hunt. I have spent an embarrassing proportion of my life searching for things at thrift stores. But the thing is that most people don't want to do that every single time that they need something, especially when they need something specific. And if our solution to fashion waste is, well, everyone just needs to spend 4 hours of their day every weekend, every time they need something, we're going to lose. Secondhand clothing has got to compete with the convenience of buying new. And that is the part where I think that resellers provide an incredibly important service. And that's an important word here. Resellers are providing a service. They're not just providing the goods themselves. Instead of one Goodwill containing a few thousand random items that people in the general vicinity are able to come and shop and find, platforms like Poshmark, Depop, and eBay are making these items accessible to millions of shoppers all around the world. And it's resellers who are turning thrift stores into search engines. Suddenly, I can search Farm Rio dress, size extra large, and maybe I find a listing from some girl in Ohio who found that dress at her local Goodwill and made it available for me to purchase. And now I can buy it, still, by the way, at a lower price than what I would pay for a new Farm Rio dress. And I was enabled to support the secondhand resale economy instead of buying something new. That reseller turned a treasure hunt into a search engine. And by the way, there is consumer data to back up what I'm saying and how important it is to make these things searchable. I'm not just making this up. According to ThredUp's 2025 resale report, 48% of shoppers say that personalization and search discovery make secondhand shopping just as easy as shopping new. And that is huge because if we actually want consumers to shop secondhand over shopping new, then we have to make the process as convenient as possible. And resellers are not just making clothing searchable, they're also moving clothing between markets. Which brings me back to the comment that sparked this video in the first place. Now, the item that I bought that the person who was commenting on my last video was referring to was an item that I purchased from ThredUp to resell on Poshmark. ThredUp is a for-profit company. They receive massive amounts of inventory. ThredUp lists over 50,000 new items every single day, and they use their own systems to determine what to list and how much to price it for. I found this one single piece on ThredUp that I thought was underpriced and that I thought I could find a buyer for on a different platform, Poshmark. I purchased it at the advertised price that ThredUp chose to sell it for, and then I listed it on Poshmark. And yes, I listed it for more money, but here's the part that I think gets overlooked. ThredUp and Poshmark do not have the same customers. Sure, some of them may be the same, but ThredUp actually has less than 2 million active users, and Poshmark has over 80 million registered users. The person who bought that piece from me on Poshmark most likely never would have seen it on ThredUp because they may not shop there. Maybe they exclusively shop on Poshmark. That's what arbitrage does. It moves products between markets to make them available to different customers. And the thing is, I actually really care about having a wide range of sizes available in my closet. I don't want to carry 200 size small dresses and nothing else. So if I'm able to find something amazing in a plus size, I want to pick it up because I want to make it available to more plus size shoppers to make their experience shopping secondhand easier. Essentially, I want those pieces circulating through the resale ecosystem. And I completely understand why the plus size conversation is more emotionally charged. Finding great plus size clothing secondhand can be harder. So I do understand why someone saw me doing that and thought, oh, you're taking that piece away from someone else who could have bought it. But I think ultimately comments like that are assigning enormous blame onto an individual transaction when really it is a much larger structural issue. If there isn't enough high quality plus size clothing in the secondhand market, that's a problem that starts much earlier in the fashion life cycle. You can absolutely think that my price is too high. And if the market agrees with you, guess what? It won't sell. And that's the risk that I take on as a reseller. And that's where the margin comes from, by creating value in a new marketplace and taking on the risk associated with that. There's another version of this criticism that I think is actually stronger. What about the resellers who go into a thrift store and they take all the good stuff? If resellers are going into thrift stores and taking all the best brands in the first 10 minutes of it opening, then doesn't that mean that there's less good stuff available for everyone else? On an individual rack, in an individual store, on a particular day, a reseller cherry picking the best brands could mean that there is less good stuff available for everyone else. And I don't think it's intellectually honest to pretend otherwise. The truth is, there is competition for desirable secondhand clothing. But the question is whether that makes reselling unethical, because every shopper who removes an item from a rack to purchase it is making that item not available to the next person who comes along. If I find a beautiful $8 cashmere sweater at Goodwill and I purchase it to wear it myself, then I'm also removing that sweater from the rack and making it unavailable for the next person who comes along. If I find that same sweater and I decide to buy it to gift to my sister for Christmas, that still makes the sweater unavailable to the next buyer. If I buy it, wear it twice, and redonate it again, guess what? Still makes it unavailable to the next buyer that day. If I buy it and sell it on eBay, it still makes it unavailable to the next buyer. The outcome at that particular thrift store is the same. One person found a one-of-a-kind item, decided to purchase it at the advertised price, and the item is now unavailable to the next person who comes along. But notice something. If I buy it for someone else or to wear it myself personally, no one cares. If I bought it to resell, suddenly it's a problem. So the objection isn't really about the sweater. It's about the profit. And I think that that's worth interrogating because the existence of profit does not inherently create harm. If you want to prove that there's harm being done, then you would have to demonstrate that a specific person was being harmed, how they were being harmed, and whether the reseller had any obligation to that person who was being harmed. And I think that's pretty hard to establish. There's another side of the accessibility argument that I think often gets overlooked too. Anyone can become a reseller. Reselling has an incredibly low barrier to entry. You don't need a degree, you don't need investors, you don't need a storefront. All you need is clothes from your own closet that you can start selling with, and then you can reinvest that money into clothes that you thrift to start your own reselling business. So while there's a lot of talk about whether reselling makes secondhand clothing less accessible to lower income shoppers, I think that we should acknowledge that reselling itself can be an accessible way for people to build their own income, potentially get out of a bad economic situation. And I actually think that's why reselling has gotten so popular. The very same business model that some people criticize as being exploitative is also one that has very few barriers to entry for an average ordinary person to participate in. Now, here's another important distinction that I hear all the time, and it really bothers me. Reselling is the same thing as scalping. Absolutely not. And I will explain why. Let's use concert tickets as an example. Let's say that there are 20,000 tickets available to an Olivia Rodrigo concert, and there are 100,000 people who want those tickets. A scalper goes and buys 20 of those tickets specifically because they know that demand dramatically exceeds supply. So what they've done is taken control of a part of a deliberately limited set of inventory, and they've made it available to the exact same customer base that already existed at a markup. For scalpers, scarcity is the business opportunity. And if you think about it, the scalper hasn't added any value to the transaction. I think that's why people get so heated. They've just taken the exact same product and put themselves in between the artist or the venue and are benefiting from the price difference between what the artist would have charged and what some fan might be willing to pay for it. And to be clear, I fundamentally disagree with doing this. Now, let's compare that to me standing in a thrift store holding a random dress from Anthropologie from 2022. Sure, I can do my research, but realistically, I don't actually know if anyone's going to buy it. There's not a line of 50 people begging me to buy it and willing to pay, exorbitant amounts of money for this particular dress. There very well might be 0 people in all of the United States searching for it. So what I'm doing is making an educated guess based on my skills and experience that someone will want this dress eventually, and that they might be willing to pay more than what I'm paying for it. And then I'm taking on the cost, labor, and inventory risk associated with purchasing it and attempting to sell it. And that is the fundamental difference. The scalper profits by controlling access to something that is in low supply that people already want. A reseller profits by finding something and then finding the buyer who might want it. The reseller is adding value to the transaction by improving discoverability and curating a selection of items that buyers may want. The scalper monetizes scarcity. The reseller monetizes discovery. And to be clear, the fashion market has almost the entire opposite problem to a market like concert tickets. We don't have 20,000 garments and 100,000 people looking for them. We have an absolutely enormous fragmented clothing ecosystem, and the challenge is finding the individual buyers and matching them to the pieces that they want. That matching function is where resellers create value. And the value that they create is the profit margin that they earn. So no, I don't think that buying a dress for $10 at Goodwill and selling it for $50 is the same thing as buying Taylor Swift tickets and selling them for a 4x markup. But to be clear, that doesn't mean that I automatically think that everything that a reseller does is ethical. There are definitely places where I think that this business model crosses the line. And I personally really do try to toe that line and consider these types of things before I make any business decisions. For example, sometimes there are genuinely charity shops or things that are being offered to the community for free or for heavily discounted prices that are for people who are experiencing hardship. Do I think that purchasing them and then flipping them for a profit is ethical? Probably not. If you're using bots to intentionally source scarce inventory and buy it and flip it for a profit to the existing customer base that was also trying to get it at retail value, to me, that's more on the scalping side. Or if there's an emergency situation, like during COVID when people needed toilet paper and you're buying out all the toilet paper and then selling it at a huge markup. No, I don't think that that's ethical. And here's the other thing. Resellers are also not entitled to any profit that they want. I can buy a $5 dress at Goodwill and list it for $500. And the market can tell me that I'm insane. Nobody has to buy it. But I don't think that the basic act of walking into a thrift store, buying something at its publicly available price, and then reselling it online for a profit is inherently unethical. I just don't think that we should confuse making a profit with causing harm. Those are not automatically the same thing. So this brings me back to the original question and the whole point of this video. Is reselling ethical? Yes, I think it can be. And I'd actually go further than that. I would say that a healthy resale ecosystem is necessary if we genuinely want secondhand shopping to compete with buying new. We're not going to solve fashion waste by expecting everyone to become a professional thrifter. Most people don't want to go to 5 Goodwills to find a pair of jeans. Secondhand is becoming a legitimate arm of the apparel industry. According to the 2026 ThredUp Resale Report, the US secondhand fashion market grew nearly 4 times faster than the general apparel market in 2025. And I think that is a great thing, because when I look at this system that is creating more and more clothes every single day than we could ever know what to do with, well, we already have a huge oversupply of existing clothing. My main concern is not, what if too many people are trying to sell used clothes? It's, how can we make used clothing more appealing to a broader variety of people? And ultimately, that is the value that I think that resellers provide. The value isn't just in the garment itself, it's in finding the garment and distributing it to the people who want it. Okay, I'm gonna get off my soapbox now. I would love to hear your thoughts. I am genuinely curious. I know that there are probably going to be rebuttals in the comments, and I'm open to hearing them and having a conversation about this. So please let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do you think reselling is unethical? Does it depend where you're sourcing? How about when plus size clothing comes into the mix? And where do you draw the line between reselling and scalping? And thanks so much for watching to the end. I really appreciate it. If you want to see more content like this, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.